And I'm assuming you're just seeing the
Hi.
PowerPoint, right?
Yeah. Hi,
Okay.
everybody. We are live. I am Casey McGovern with Nursepreneurs, and I'm here with Jack Keelty with CM&F Group. I want to apologize. You probably all can hear my sick voice. I'm a little under the weather. Luckily, Jack is not, so he will not sound like he's sick when he's talking, and he's going to do the majority of the talking. But he's here to talk to us about medical malpractice basics for nursepreneurs, and I think that's a big deal. I think it makes all of our eyes glaze over when we start thinking about liability as nurse business owners, and maybe even sometimes scares us away from doing it at all. So hopefully Jack will keep us from shying away from our businesses because of liability. I will let you take it away, Jack.
All right. Well, thanks, Casey. We all hope you feel better.
Thanks.
So yeah, hey everybody. Just to quickly introduce myself, my name's Jack. I run the underwriting team for CM&F Group, which is a medical malpractice insurance company. We've worked with healthcare professionals for over 100 years, since 1919, family-owned business, and we just breathe healthcare. Our goal really is to just do our small part in helping you all do the great work you do in this world. We absolutely love healthcare professionals, and if you can take anything away from this presentation, it's that CM&F just wants to help you however we can. That's the basis of why we're talking. And if we can just give you one or two pieces of information that help you, in your progression through starting your own business, then that's great. Then I think we've done our job. And you know, as we go on here, feel free to ask any questions. I'll stop at the end. We'll be able to do a little Q&A if there's any questions. And then certainly I'm going to provide a link for you all to set up one-on-one time with me specifically, because every business is different. Every situation is different, and we want to make sure we cater to that and help all you folks, as you need us to. So, with that, I'll kind of jump in. Before I do, just want to confirm, none of this is going to be legal advice. I'm not a lawyer by trade, so if there is questions involving, tax benefits for setting up an LLC or a sole proprietorship, those would be more on the legal side. And I'd advise you to speak with an attorney on all that stuff. But, stopping there with that said, let's kind of just jump into it.
Hey, Jack, while you're before you get going, I
Yeah.
just want to let you know if there'll be questions popping up on the side. I don't know if you can see them, because if you're full screen, you might not be able to. But I'll find good spots to drop some of the questions if that makes sense, and otherwise we can
Perfect.
always do them at the end.
Perfect. Yeah, just stop me whenever you want, Casey. I don't see them
Cool.
popping up, so I'll answer
Yep.
anything as we go along.
Perfect.
All right, great. So, I think we just want to start at the basics, right? Building a business, it has risks, just like anything we do in life. Driving to the grocery store, you have your risks there. Starting a medical practice certainly has its own risks, but that should never dissuade you from starting. The best route is, if you believe in what you do, which I think you all should, you should jump into it and then just leverage folks to kind of help you along the way. So just to give some background, what is CM&F? What do we do? So, we provide insurance solutions that help you prevent, mitigate, and transfer your risk. So when you're looking at insurance, just a holistic stance, insurance is the transfer of risk away from your personal and business assets to an insurance company like CM&F. You pay a premium, and then we have a duty to defend you if something goes wrong. And, insurance, the cool thing about insurance is you hopefully never need it, but it gives you that peace of mind to go about your day and not worry about the little things. And that's what CM&F is here for. And that's what we've helped folks do for, 100 years. We have risk management, cheat sheets we can provide you. We have one-on-one coaching that I'll be able to provide you when it comes to setting up policies. And then CM&F's part of a large organization called Hub International, and that's a top 5 insurance brokerage in the world. And if there's a question that CM&F can't answer for you, somebody can. And we have all those resources to help you through really whatever situation you're in. So with that in mind, let's just talk about one form of insurance, which is our focus today, which is medical malpractice. So what is medical malpractice? That's just a fancy word. You might see it referred to as professional liability. Um, Professional liability and medical malpractice are synonymous. Professional liability is just a broad term, whereas medical malpractice is a type of professional liability. So that's what we're focusing on today. And, what does that involve? So when you're providing care to your clientele, any injury to another person, caused by your negligent act or failure to act by a healthcare professional is what medical malpractice is here to cover. And what's important to know is as you work on your clients, you are at the risk of offering a negligent act. Human beings make mistakes. That's okay. That's why we have insurance in place to make sure that if you do come into a situation where maybe you failed to act or you didn't meet the standard of care, um, you have somebody or something there to help protect you. So that's what a medical malpractice policy is used for. And what's important to know here, and this is in any scenario where you're offering patient care, you're going to have personal legal liability on the acts that you're providing. And that can be whether you're just a solo practitioner, offering coverage on behalf of your startup practice, whether you're working for a big hospital, whether you have a practice that may have employees, you're going to have personal liability, and you're going to have liability for your business. And you want to think about it in kind of two buckets. You've got your own personal assets and your business assets, and regardless of how big your practice may be, you're still going to have those two buckets. So it's really important to understand the need to cover not just yourself but also your business, because when a claim comes in, if you have a gap in coverage, you might be legally responsible for paying out something to whomever is filing the suit. So when we talk about medical malpractice, it's important not only to understand what it is, but how you can use it to cover your personal and your business assets. So, with that in mind, let's just quickly talk about the different kinds of scenarios you all may be in. So, understanding what Nursepreneurs does, all you folks are certainly in the entrepreneurial spirit, thinking maybe you're going to start your own practice. Maybe you work for a hospital right now and you just want to do some per diem work on the side. Maybe your hospital policy doesn't cover, IV hydration on the side and you really want to start that up. Maybe you have your own practice already. That's great. Just quickly, I want to walk you through, some of the considerations that you should be thinking about when it comes to applying for coverage. So the way I've broken this up is kind of in two buckets. What do you do if you're just an individual right now and you have a startup practice, no employees, you just want to get something, started on the side. What does that look like? So, with CM&F, we are a fully digital company. So that's different for other med mal companies. Frankly, insurance is a little antiquated in that there's a lot of, offline underwriting guidelines and filling out applications and sending them in. CM&F doesn't do any of that. We have you go right online and you can get coverage in as quick as 5 minutes. So it just really the bottleneck here is figuring out, well, what do I do when I get online? Um, so that's what we're going to talk about quickly. So let's just say you're an individual provider and you're starting up your own practice. Maybe, you work for a hospital, you've talked with the lawyer and you want to set up an LLC or a sole proprietorship or a PLLC, but you just don't know how to get started from coverage. So in that scenario, what we would recommend is you go online, you apply as an individual, and what you can do is you can add your business as something called an additional insured. And CM&F doesn't charge anything at all to add a business as an additional insured. And going back to that previous slide, what that does is the individual policy covers your own personal exposure and your own personal assets. When you add a business as something called an additional insured, it creates a layer of what we call vicarious liability for the business. So, to give you an example, let's say Joe Smith is a nurse practitioner and he wants to get coverage for his LLC that he just formed. He works for the hospital, but he wants to do Botox on the side. He would go ahead and he'd apply as an individual and he would list his Botox LLC as an additional insured. Now, let's say he was providing care and he was named in a suit and his business was picked up in that suit just simply by association. And that's typically how we see these claims play out. Every party that might get named probably is going to get named. And by having his business as an additional insured, it allows for the business's assets to be covered under that individual policy as well as his own personal assets. So it's a really neat way to cover both ends of the spectrum. And applying for that kind of policy takes, again, about 5 minutes to 10 minutes. And you could have coverage set up same day.
Jack, can I just interject here real fast? Just because I think one thing about individual coverage that maybe a lot of our audience doesn't really realize, and I actually learned, well, I was reminded of this talking to you guys. In nursing school, we're told kind of briefly, like, make sure you cover your own personal liability insurance, even if you're covered by the hospital that you work for, the employer that you work for. And I think a lot of us ignore that after nursing school, maybe because when we do that, we're young, or I don't know, whatever. We're stubborn. We don't think that anything's going to happen. But I just want to clarify here when you're talking about individual that this is something that you probably should be carrying regardless, right? In addition to any insurance you have covered by your employer. And whether or not you've started a business or have even thought about starting a business yet. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I was just about to get into that, Casey. I appreciate you bringing that
Oh,
up.
thank you.
So,
Okay, good.
yeah,
Sorry.
yeah. No, no, no. That's a great question. So, the answer is absolutely yes. It's an overwhelming yes. So, and the reasoning is even if you're covered under an employer's policy, it's really important to remember who that policy is responsible for covering. So, if you look at an employer's policy, let's say you work for a hospital, that hospital is going to be what we call the first name and insured. So you look at the certificate on that top left-hand corner, it's going to be their name, not yours. And certainly insurance companies are never out there to get anybody, but their duty to defend is tied to the named insured. So if you're working at a hospital, you have to understand that if there is a claim, the insurance company's responsibility is to first and foremost cover that hospital. And while you might get picked up in the coverage, there's a couple of disconnects. And I'll start with the most important, which is license defense. So if you're looking at a hospital's policy or an employer's policy, this is just a general comment. Typically, they'll be able to cover you if you're working on behalf of that hospital when the claim occurs and there's a settlement that relates to the hospital. But the gap here is if you have license action then taken against you, and you have defense costs associated with that. It gets reported on the NPDB, the National Practitioners Database. That policy is probably not going to have your best interest in mind, and they're not going to necessarily cover you for that. So that's where this individual policy is imperative for having, because when you have something that is in your name, that gives you the peace of mind to know that regardless of what happens, you'll be covered. And you won't just be covered if you have to pay out a claim, you'd be covered for defense costs, license defense, HIPAA defense, and all that, all those kind of what we would call a sublimit. Those are crucial because there's always more factors involving claims than just paying out a lump sum. There's a lot of considerations you need to take. So I wholeheartedly agree with Casey. As you get out of your clinical rotations and you get into an employment, you always want to be looking to get an individual policy on the side that you are the owner of and you are in control of. And if you look at the benefits here on this kind of half table, our individual policies are entirely portable. So what I mean by that is, and it's kind of built for the entrepreneur in the sense where if you're working for the hospital right off the bat, our individual policy, it's going to cover you there. But what happens when you want to start your business? Do you need to get a new policy? Do you have to cancel that old one? The answer is you don't have to do really anything. That policy is portable in that it's going to cover you at each role that you're working on. And you own that policy entirely. So the policy covers you while you're at the hospital, at your employer's office, the clinical office space. It would cover you for your mobile services if you're offering, Botox in a box or IV hydration on the side. And that's just where having your own individual policy gives you that peace of mind, and it allows you to go and do the great things you do in this world without having to worry about claims. Um, so I agree with you, Casey. It's really important. If you're really going to take away one thing from this, other than the fact that CMNF's here to help, is that we really recommend you have your own policy in place, and that could even be while you're in clinical rotations as a student. We offer student coverage for MPs, um, same for RNs. So anything in that kind of realm, feel free to ask away if you have specific questions or you want to set up a meeting on that stuff. Super happy to help. But it's very important to have your own policy. Um, Now, just shifting quickly to folks who might be a little bit farther along in the process. So what I mean by that is, obviously everyone on this call is some form of an entrepreneur in the sense that you might want to start up your own business, and maybe you've already gone two steps further and you've hired staff. So, what does that look like? If you own your practice, maybe you have one or two staff members. Maybe you have some contractors who might just be, per diem working for you on the side. Um, what do you have to think about? What kind of considerations you have to keep in mind? So, for our purposes right now, you want to think of, your two application processes are: if you're by yourself, you'd apply as an individual, but if you have staff members, you'd apply as a group. And through CMNF's program, we have hundreds of different types of groups that we cover, whether it's IV hydration groups or nurse educator groups, staffing agencies. We have a lot of capabilities to help you depending on what you need. And when you go on our website, and if you just were taking a quick overview, you'd see you'd have the ability to apply as an individual or a group. And that group products for folks who have maybe a couple staff members, they already have an LLC or a PLLC in place. Um, and what that would do is, that would cover your business. So again, thinking of personal and business assets, it would cover your business and all of those business assets that are tied to it, and it would cover everybody who works on behalf of that practice. So each, the owner, so maybe the nurse practitioner who started the practice, and then anybody and all those folks that they've hired on to work on behalf of them. And when you're actually going through the application, you'll see there's a spot where you can input your clinical staff into like a roster or a head count. And that just allows us to understand, how big's your group. And when you're thinking about, our practices here, the overall, goal here is to organically grow. So then the question becomes, well, what happens if I hire somebody else on? Business is doing great. We've got more and more folks looking to get, employed through our practice. Well, how does that work with coverage? The answer is, our group policies are scalable. So they're built for the entrepreneur and for the groups that intend to grow. So we offer something called blanket language, which means that when you buy a group policy with us, we issue an endorsement that just says, hey, all employees, contractors are covered while they work on behalf of this group. And what that allows you to do is, as the business grows, the policy just grows with you. You don't have to change anything. You don't have to pay anything midterm. And organically, as you grow, CM&F is there to cover you, with that growth. So I'll just pause there. Casey, any questions that I could answer on that stuff?
The only thing that I would say is, and this is probably common sense, but I feel like it's worth saying again, is like if you do have a group policy and you have individual like healthcare providers that are employed under you,
Mhm.
your employees might still ask you like, oh, I'm covered. But I would say it's still worth saying to those people, yes, you're covered with our group policy, but you should consider having your own, too, as a business owner,
Mhm.
appropriately guiding your employees toward individual policies as well, and not
Absolutely.
giving that false idea that they're like all good, they're all set as long as there's a group policy for your business as the owner.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah, that's all I would say.
Yeah. As the practice owner, it's your responsibility to relay what your employees are covered for. And what that would be is only work done on behalf of your business. So if you were an NP business owner and one of your employees, let's say they're an RN, wants to do work on the side, you would want to relay to them that they should obtain an individual policy as well. It's a similar concept to if you were an employee for a hospital, why you'd want an individual policy. So it's more specific to, as the practice owner, what do you need to do to get your business and yourself covered? And then it's understanding the intricacies of the policies and relaying that to your staff to make sure that they're covered. Um, and again, that kind of conversation is something that I'd be more than happy to step in and kind of relay what those intricacies are on a case by case. So again, if you want to set up a meeting with specific scenarios, I would be more than happy to talk anybody through that. But that's
Thank
great.
you for that.
Really great point, Casey. All right. So just to shift a little bit, I think it's always important, to understand who you're talking with and why you should even listen to them. Frankly, I can't tell you how many presentations I've listened to where I just didn't really understand what that person's background was, why I should be listening to them. So just to give you some background on CM&F, and why we're speaking to you today. CM&F created the first med mal policy for nurses in 1947. We've been around since 1919, and we're a family-owned business. Um, it's really important to know that you want to be speaking with folks when it comes to insurance, folks who have been there and seen all that you've seen. So, as you all know, the role of a nurse and the role of a nurse practitioner that has changed tremendously since 1947, and CM&F has been there to see all of that, and we've grown just as the healthcare space has grown. So we really do understand what you all go through on a daily basis, and again, we just want to be here to do our small part in helping give you peace of mind. So, as I kind of alluded to at the beginning of the presentation, you want to understand who you're going to get a policy from. That's a really important distinction when you're looking at all the different options you're going to have for medical malpractice. You know, each company that you speak with, they're going to write a policy through a carrier, aka an insurance company. And CM&F, we write our policies through an insurance company called Medical Protective Group. Medical Protective Group is the best med mal carrier in the nation. That A++, that stands for their AM Best financial rating, which means they have proven over their term as a company that they are financially responsible and they're able to defend and pay out claims for their clients. That is super important because you might find, maybe you get a quote online and it's really, really cheap. Well, oftentimes when you see something that doesn't match up with everything else you've seen, it's because that insurance carrier or company hasn't been around long enough to experience any claims. So they haven't had any of that loss history to give them a high financial stability rating. So it's important to understand who you write the policy with is essential when it comes to that moment in time where you're at a panic and something's happened. You want somebody who's been there, done that, and has excelled at it to be there in your moment of need. And MedPro Group, they have a 93% win rate in trial, and we offer something. It's down here in the best in class coverage details here. Something called a pure consent to settle clause, which what that means is for anybody who's covered through our program, whether you're an individual, you're a group, you're even just an employee of a group, it means that if there is a claim, we have to obtain a consent from you to settle or defend that claim in court. And that's really important because it puts you in the driver's seat because you ultimately know the care you provided. And that is incredibly important when it comes to claims because every claim that you incur, you'll have to report to a database, and that can affect your ability to get employment in the future. It can affect your policies um, and your clientele base because that's public information. So it's important to have somebody really strong having your back in these scenarios and making sure that you're involved in that process. Um, I can't stress that enough. We've seen other companies where they have something called a hammer clause, which means you have a claim, you have that moment of need where you need somebody to support you. And in that claim, they say, hey, we think we can settle for this amount, and it ends up settling for something higher. That insurance company might make you pay the difference. So that could be $5,000 or it could be $100,000. And you never want to put yourself in a position where there's any discrepancy where you have to pay something that the insurance company should have helped you with. So the reason I bring that up is, it's just more than imperative to understand that concept of having somebody who has been there, done that, have your back. Um, and just to kind of elaborate on some of the other items you see here, obviously pricing is going to be a big one because the first thing anybody looks at, myself included, if I'm going to get insurance for my car, I'm going to look at the cost. Is it more expensive than everybody else? Is it cheaper? Why? All of our products are incredibly competitively priced. Typically, we save anywhere from 5 to 30% in terms of cost on all of our products. Um, we offer, like I alluded to, licensed defense. So not just the claim itself, but if there's action taken against your license, um, we have limits up to $2 million per claim. So if you have a humongous practice uh, or a practice that's just growing substantially and you want to get covered for more, we're here to help with that. And then the last item I'm going to say here is, when you're looking at claims, you obviously have the claim itself, which you might settle for whatever value, but you also have costs to defend yourself. If you do go to court or trial, you're going to have lawyers working with you, and that cost is actually separate from whatever the claim settles for. So you want to ensure that you have defense costs in addition to whatever limits you hold. And every product that we offer, we do that because it's just the right thing to do. We're there for you. If you need us, we'll pay that claim out because we have a duty to defend, and we'll cover your expenses as it relates to lawyer fees. So all of that kind of just goes into what CM&F does, why you're speaking to me right now, and hearing what I have to say. And again, we're just here to do our small part. Um, any questions on that, Casey, before I jump to the next slide?
No, I just think that's so important because I think even some of the things you just said are things that we wouldn't even think. Well, maybe this is just me, and I'm like, as far as I'm insurance illiterate, maybe, but I wouldn't think to ask necessarily that question, like about my defense coverage. In my head, I would assume it's covered, and like you said, like these are things that maybe I wouldn't have asked, and then you hit a situation and you find that out in the moment, and it's pretty expensive to be defended in court or,
Yeah.
you know. So
Yeah.
anyway, that's my point is thanks for saying it because those are things that at least people who are watching are realizing they need to have in their mind and be asking when they're looking for coverage.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, just having the experience of helping folks get coverage, these kind of items are usually not part of the initial conversation when you're getting a quote online. And it's just again, if you want to take away anything from this slide, it's just remember to ask those questions that you might not see on the quote. you know, are you going to ask for my help or opinion when a claim comes in? Or are you just going to settle it because you want to save as much money as possible? That's a question that might come to mind, and that underwriter you're speaking with, they're going to have to be able to answer you on that. So when it comes to CM&F, that's all on our website, ready to review when you're looking to get a quote. We like to put that out there because that should start the conversation and educate you on what you should be asking about. So that's why I thought it was important to just put this on the slide. It's not just about the pricing, which is kind of that shiny object that everyone looks at. And it's very important. Don't get me wrong. It's the first thing anybody's going to look at, but it's what goes into that pricing that makes it worthwhile. What is it about that policy that's different than the rest?
Right.
Um, yeah.
Yeah, 100%. When we see conversations about things like this, even in our group, it's very much like price. Like everyone's like, well, what quote did you get? What was the price? What was the price? What was the price? And it's very infrequently, well, what's covered at that price? And that's
Right.
really the more important question to be asking.
100%. Yep. And as an underwriter, that's my background by trade. My role in this whole process and underwriters' roles in this whole process should be always coverage first, price second. What is this coverage going to be there for as opposed to what does it cost? You pay and now you have what? It's really important to flip the script there and say, all right, here's my quote, but what does this actually cover me for? So,
Yep.
regardless of if you're speaking with me or somebody else, that should always be your approach to these conversations.
Someone, Jack, in the group just asked about, she's an RN down in Florida, and excuse me, I apologize again to everyone for my voice, but and she's working at home or wanting to work independently, providing nursing services in the home primarily, and she's asking if you guys have written policies to cover this, which sounds like concierge nursing.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. So that goes back to the portable comment I made on our policies. So the answer is overwhelmingly yes. We can cover you wherever you're practicing, assuming you're licensed to practice, in that state. So if you're looking at offering mobile services, you might work at somebody's house, you might work in a clinical office, somebody's actual employment. Uh, we cover you for all of that. So the policy is entirely portable wherever you go.
And then she also asked how you guys compare in terms of coverage to NSO, which I don't know if you can answer that specifically or not.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I'm happy to kind of allude to it. So, NSO is one of the other competitors in this space. They've written nurses for, around the same time as CM&F, maybe a little bit less. Um, in terms of cost, obviously that's the first thing everybody thinks about, like we just said. We're more competitive than NSO on the majority of our products. We've done an incredible amount of cost comparisons across our market. So when you look at costs, we're highly competitive. And then it's really what separates us are these sublimits and who we write through. So MedPro Group, again, is our carrier, and so does not write through them, to my knowledge. And that's going to be the biggest differentiating factor is who we have covering you in the event that that incident happens and you have a claim. MedPro's 93% win rate is without question the highest win rate of any carrier in the country, and it's not even close. Um, Similarly, our pure consent to settle clause is pretty unique. I would say that we're one of maybe a few who offer that kind of what we would call a clause in our policy. Most insurance companies offer a hammer clause when it comes to consent to settle. And not to get too much in the weeds here, but what that means is if you have a claim and the insurance company takes a look at it, they say, hey, we think we can settle this for $100,000, and you say, no, I don't really want to do that, I want to fight this and go to court, and it settles for $200,000. If you had a hammer clause on your policy, you would have to pay anything over what the insurance company thought it should settle at. So you're on the hook for $100,000 in that example. A pure consent to settle clause, which is what we offer and is very unique, we would still cover the full payout. Um, so again, that's really getting in the weeds of understanding the policy and what you're covered for. But I would say those are some good differentiating factors between us and NSL.
Thanks, Jack. Genevieve said thank you. She's very new to this.
Oh, no, of course. That's why we're here. And Genevieve, if you want to set up a meeting one-on-one with me, there's going to be a link at the end of this presentation where we can schedule some time to talk. I'd be really happy to do that. Cool.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. So just want to kind of wrap this up with some other considerations that y'all might think of. Um, you know, Building a business, like we said on the first slide, it's got its risks. And medical malpractice, which is what we've talked about this whole time, that's just one piece of the puzzle, really. It's probably your most important coverage that you're going to need because it's going to protect you, your ability to practice, your livelihood, and your peace of mind. But you're also going to have maybe some other exposures. I've named a few here. I don't necessarily want to get too in depth with what each of these are, but just in a general sense, a business owner's policy, that would cover your commercial property if you owned equipment for your practice. It would also cover like slip and fall risks if you have maybe an office space that you've rented. um, Workers' compensation, that's typically a requirement by the state if you have employees. So that would be a policy you'd get to cover your employees in case one of them gets injured and you have to reimburse their medical payments. Commercial auto would be something where if you have vehicles that you have kind of tied to your business that you're operating and going to client homes, tying back into that mobile question from prior, maybe you want to have your car covered in case you get nicked in your drive to the client's house. Uh, Cyber would be if you're storing very specific patient records in a database, you have the risk of somebody going at you and holding you for ransom for that kind of information. And then the last, excess liability. If you have a really large practice, sometimes folks want to get a policy that kind of sits on top of all those other policies, kind of like if you're thinking of a tree. You have all these branches and then the big cushion at the top. um, an excess policy might be something where you just want to have some extra coverage in case there's a big claim. Um, and again, without going too much in depth for each of these are just other things that you can consider, as you're looking at getting coverage. And in that first sentence, I mentioned Insurion. So CM&F's part of a large company. We work with Hub International, and within Hub, there's CM&F, and then there's Insurion. And Insurion's our sister company. We work with them daily. I was actually on the phone with Insurion minutes before we hopped on this call, and they are absolutely fantastic. And the reason I put this slide in here is there's things that CM&F or any insurance company won't be able to offer because every practice has their specialty. Um, and what we can offer, Insurion typically can. So we use them as a resource if you all have questions on other coverages, if you all need policies on other coverages. That's where I can come in and I will introduce you directly with them and have you work with our favorite brokers out there. Um, you know, and really the big takeaway here is if there's anything you all need, we're here to help you. Whether it's directly with us or with somebody else, we're going to make that introduction. We're going to be your support system and kind of guide you through that process. Um, so, unless there's any questions here, um, I included this link. That's just right to my personal calendar. You can set up a meeting with me. I would love to talk with each and every one of you if you have time. Um, that second there, that's a link right to our online application. If you want to go and get a quote right now, you want to go get coverage right now. If you understood everything we talked about and you're ready to go, you can get a quote and bind coverage in as little as 5 minutes. So, with that, I just want to say again, a huge thank you to all of you. CM&F wouldn't be here unless you all were doing the great work you do in this world. And we just want to do our small part and give you that peace of mind so you can go out there and change the world for some of these folks. So just want to say a big thank you to everyone. And certainly, Casey, if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you. Couple of things. I wanted to talk really quickly and just say, I think that's so huge for anyone who's watching, because some of the other insurance types, I guess, that you mentioned that Insurion can help with are things that, again, as nurses, we have these great business ideas, but we're not business. Most of us are not, we're not educated in business. A few of us maybe have an MBA, but most of us don't. And our brains don't necessarily work in this way of thinking about particularly like cyber insurance. That it would have been right over my head.
Right.
It's just not something we think about. We kind of think about the delivering the service itself, and we're not necessarily always wearing our business hats. So I think that's huge. And I want everyone to remember that CM&F can be a resource when it comes to connecting you with somebody who can talk to you about all these other needs beyond liability. And then Jack, I just wanted to say, I'm going to drop those two links into sort of the chat underneath as well, just because honestly, I don't know with StreamYard if they'll be able to click it or not. So if you'll send me after, everyone who's watching, I will drop them in underneath the actual videos, because these will be available and evergreen. So I'll drop them in if you don't mind sending to me.
Absolutely. Yep. I'll send that right over. And please, everybody, don't hesitate to set up a time if you want to talk. Even if you haven't gotten any step into starting your own business, I would still love to have that conversation and just, clear up any questions you have.
Yep. And that's big too, is everyone thinks like, well, I'm not sure. I'm still I call them the toe dippers, right? They've got these,
Right.
Aspirations and dreams. And so they're kind of educating themselves, but they don't think they're in a position to call you guys yet, or to call anybody related to their business. You are. Do it now, so that when you are ready to jump in head first, you already know, okay, I got to get back with CM&F. I talk to them. I know what I need with them. I need to chat with them. All those things. It's not too early to have a conversation.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's never too early to start the conversation. And
Yeah.
even if it's just the first step, we're here to help.
Yep. And actually, I would even argue for all my nurse friends who we all are perfectionists. I'm looking at everybody because I am that way too. We all want everything to be really perfect, but I would argue that having these conversations before everything's perfect is actually a good push for all of us who kind of put that obstacle in our own way of, well, I don't have everything perfect and the idea is not perfect. It's okay. Have the conversation and it'll keep driving you forward because you need to get that business off the ground.
Yep. Agreed.
So anyway, that's my little spiel. Thank you for coming, Jack. That was great.
Yeah. Thanks, Casey.
All right. All right. I'm going to end the broadcast. And everyone, like I said, I'll drop those links in so you guys can get in touch with CM&F and with Jack if you need them.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Casey. Hope you feel better.
Thanks, Jack.